Good morning. We are holding on the 37th day of the Omer. We're making our way towards Shavuot. And many are also studying Pirkei Avot, chapters of the fathers, ethics of the sages during this time of year. And the usual explanation will be, well, there are at least six Shabbatot between Pesach and Shavuot, and there are 5 chapters of Pirkei Avot. We have 6 in the book, but there are really only 5 chapters of Mishnah. One is an addition, we'll see that later. But somehow this became Pirkei Avot's season. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the influence of Pirkei Avot, why and how we started this idea of having it studied on Shabbat afternoon in particular, as well as why specifically the season. Hence, why Pirkei Avot? Why on Shabbat? Why now? Why this time of year? So since the class is called Ripped from the Headlines, I had to go digging for some headlines on Pirkei Avot. And interestingly, there's a JTA reporter named Felissa Kramer who has written about Pirkei Avot at least twice. Once was just a little less than a year ago. To celebrate her second Tony of the night on Sunday, Suf's creator Shana Tao turned to Jewish tradition. Tao won awards for Best Book of the Musical and Best Original Score, written for theater, for the Broadway show about the women who fought to be able to vote in the United States. I'm now only realizing that Suf is for the suffragette movement. I did not see the show. I didn't even know about it. In her acceptance speech for the second award, she thanked her mentors and gave a shout out to all the theater kids out there. Then she quoted a Jewish text that she said had a prominent place in her show's literature. The epigraph of my script is a quote from the Talmud. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. In Hebrew, very famously, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin lihibatel mimena. So she quoted that there. Setab, who also plays suffragist Alice Paul on the show, she added, this is a hard year in our country, and I just hope that we can remember that when we organize and come together, we're capable of making real change and progress for this country, for equality and justice. And so I hope we can all do that together. So we have here someone inspired to see progress and justice and change, and invoking Pirkei Avot. Okay, very nice. And a couple of years back, White House science advisors sworn in on 1492 edition of Pirkei Avot. We had a class a couple of months back about which books one can use to be sworn in on and taking oaths in general. But source 2, when Eric Lander was sworn in Wednesday as the White House's first ever cabinet-level science advisor, the geneticist who also made Jewish history, by taking his oath of office on a 500-year-old copy of a Jewish text filled with ethical precepts. Lander chose a 1492 edition of Pirkei Avot from the Library of Congress's holdings after searching for a swearing-in volume that reflected his Jewish and professional values, he told Vice President Kamala Harris at the ceremony. It means a lot to me about why we're all here doing this work, he said. The geneticist, who has taken leave from positions at Harvard and MIT, told Religion News Service that he convened a family meeting to brainstorm books. The family homed in on the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, or repairing the world, that has come to represent social justice for many Jews. That thought led Lander to the Mishnah, the text compiling early rabbinic discussions of how to apply Jewish law in everyday life. And from there, he landed on one section, Pirkei Avot, that contains a precept that he said reflects his personal and professional beliefs. It is not required that you complete the work, but neither may you refrain from it. I guess the theater and the science minds are all thinking alike. It is interesting how here too, Eric Lander turns towards looking for Jewish texts that inspire for him, in his mind, the concept of tikkun olam, or repairing the world. And so we need to dig a little bit more deeply. I do not know if tikkun olam as a phrase appears anywhere in Pirkei Avot. And Pirkei Avot is, for the most part, more what would be viewed as religious values than religious obligations. At the same time, we need to understand that how did this come about? I think it's clear, very often we hear of individuals invoking Jewish tradition or Talmud or rabbinic sages as influence, not necessarily taking these specific teachings within their proper context. Right? It's not uncommon in the Jewish community to hear people throw around tikkun olam as an important Talmudic Jewish value. Yes, we pray about Tikkun Olam every single day. The Olenu prayer includes the phrase L'taken Olam, fix the world. The phrase continues, B'malchut Shaddai, with God's kingdom. So there's, Tikkun Olam is within the context of Judaism as a religion, as an obligation, as a spiritual value. It's not just a slogan. But Tikkun Olam clearly has, Pirkei Avot has clearly become this influential text for informing Jewish values. How'd that come about? So let's go to the Talmud. Let's go to the rabbis themselves and try and understand this. Suffice it to say, I would imagine everyone here has heard Pirkei Avot. Many people have studied Pirkei Avot, familiar with other expressions of Pirkei Avot. And it's not by chance, it's not by accident. The Talmud in Bava Kama mentions, Rav Yehuda says, one who wants to be pious should observe the matters of tractate Nezikin, so as to avoid causing damage to others. Right? You want to know how to be an upright individual, you want to be a chassid, you want to be pious, study the laws of damages, because then you'll be more sensitive towards other people. Rava said he should observe the matters of tractate Avot. No, study Pirkei Avot. That's how you become a pious individual. And some say he should observe the matters of tractate Barachot, study blessings. And these are three very different spheres of religious endeavor. And Nizikim is, tractates like Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra, things about damages, about what happens with the ox that gores the other ox, or what happens if you find a lost object, or some of the laws of property transactions. Not necessarily the most uplifting spiritual concepts, but Rav Yehuda says that Judaism is about the nitty-gritty. Rava said, no, you want to know about being a pious Jew, you have to refine your character, and Pirkei Avot is about character. And then you have, some say, study about brachot. What about brachot? What about blessings? As I've always felt that the blessings that Jews recite often, whether it be before eating, after eating, on all sorts of other things, blessings are a way of articulating or speaking about God. And in Judaism, we don't often speak about God. We take it as a given. We have a Shema declaration. You have God at the foundation of Judaism, but we don't really talk about it practically speaking. We're very much about ritual. Blessings are an opportunity to engage in an articulation of faith. So whether it be the nitty-gritty, whether it be the aspirational values, or whether it be God, these are the areas of focus. Some have, to me, this brings to mind a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that was just recently part of the order of studying at this time of year, where it talks about that the laws of bird nests and impurity, that's the main part of the Torah, and the gematrias are like dessert, right? The idea that here we're saying damages, study damages. You would say that's too technical. That's not aspirational. That's not spiritual, right? In Judaism, we say it's the opposite. It's within the nitty gritty, right? Not the devil is in the details, but God is in the details. That's where we find our inspiration. But you have in this small statement in Bava Kama, we find God in the details. We find God in the values. We find God when talking about God. So you have that idea. Interestingly, that we're in Bava Kama. Bava Kama begins with the words Arba Avot Nizikin. There are four main categories of damages, and that word Avot, fathers, is a main category. So the word Avot also applies with regards to Pirkei Avot. These are main principles. That's another concept that, as we'll see later on, the role of the father, the role of the parent in setting the tone. So that's also the idea of Pirkei Avot. The Meiri, in introducing Pirkei Avot, takes it a little bit further along this discussion of Avot are things that constitute the basis, foundation, root, and essence of all wisdom, and every mitzvah, and the road and path to every virtue. All the more so when concealed within it are many foundations of the Torah and roots of faith. They alluded to this idea in the name of the book Avot, which teaches that there are things that issued from the fathers of the world, the pillars upon which the edifice of the Torah rests. We also encounter the word Avot with regards to the various prohibitions and forbidden activities on Shabbat. There are Avot Malacha, they're main categories, and then within those categories are smaller details. So this is Pirkei Avot are setting up some basic fundamentals, and then we move into the details. Now, as to how it acquired a more prominent place in rabbinic literature or in the popular consciousness in terms of putting it into the hands of the masses, historian Alexander Gutman has a book, Tractate Avot, Its Place in Rabbinic Literature, source number 5. For the Jew living in the Islamic environment, there was no better way of defending the Torah and its traditional interpretation than presenting a hadith of their own, right? Hadith is in the Islamic faith, right? Muslims have the Quran, which is their equivalent of the Bible. And then they have the hadith, which is the equivalent of their legal system, their Talmud. So the idea of Jews having to defend their faith, they should have hadith of their own. Of course, it had to be given a prominent place in Jewish literature, and no more suitable location could be desired than the Mishnah. The non-legal character of Avot, as well as its suitability for widespread study and reading by laymen, as well as scholars, might have been the reason for selecting this tractate. Right, Pirkei Avot stands out. It happens to also be in the 6 orders of the Mishnah. It's in the section of Nezikin, of damages. That could be the idea that, just like we saw, that understanding damages makes one more respectful of other people, more sensitive. So Avot is placed there. And it kind of is a little bit of an outlier in the order of Mishnah, because there's no Talmudic commentary on it. Right? Usually we have the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Pirkei Avot, there's only the Mishnah. And it's people a little bit unsure of how, what to do with it. Like, just as a technical example, we're familiar with the Daf Yomi, studying a page of Talmud every day. There's also what's called Mishnah Yomi, studying 2 Mishnayot every day. And then in several years, you finish all 6 orders of the Mishnah. It would seem that Avot is the last part of Nezikin, but some people don't consider it the last part of Nezikin. It kind of is an outlier. So if some people doing Mishnah Yomi, some people doing Mishnah Yomi now are up to Avot, and some people have moved on to something else, into Kudshin, because they finished Nezikin without studying Avot. Avot is the outlier. But Gutman is saying, Avot is a very helpful, succinct presentation of Jewish wisdom, Jewish faith, Jewish inspiration, and it can therefore stand out as an important volume in the Talmudic corpus. And he says, to make the defense more effective, the tractate was included in the liturgy. Right, the Pirkei Avot is in the Siddur. And he said this is not just a modern invention. This took place during the Gaonic time. Zunz reports that on good authority that the reading of Avot was customary in Arabic countries at least as early as the 9th century and became an established practice in the 11th century. Sar Shalom relates that the reading of Avot on Shabbat after Mincha was customary practice in Baghdad or Surah. Both Amram and Sadia from that Gaonic period included their respective Sidurim, the practice of reading Avot after Mincha service on Shabbat. Thus, we see that the reading of Avot originated in the Gaonic period in an Islamic environment. Since, as we have shown, the Hadiths, the historical strata, were most probably added to the Avot in Gaonic times, it can be little doubt as to the true reason for its inclusion as part of the regular service. Right? We want people to be familiar with the teaching so that Jewish wisdom, it permeates. Right? Talmud is harder for people to understand. The other more legal, technical Mishnah is harder for others to understand. Other explanations given in various literatures are conjectures or agadah. We attempt to explain the extraordinary addition to the service. Right? It's not really. They says it makes sense to put in the Siddur because everybody used the Siddur, and therefore we want everyone to have exposure to Pirkei Avot. And then you also have the idea of that it wasn't necessarily only about Jews in Islamic lands to fight against or to counter, to defense of Judaism in that respect. But source number 6, Stephen Adams, even many minhagim extant today were arguably initiated as a response to the Karaite movement. For example, many historians agree that the recital of the 3rd chapter of Mishneh Shabbat, Bameh Madlikin, which appears in the Ashkenazi liturgy on Friday evenings, following the prayer service, was introduced during the time of the Gaonim with the intent of reinforcing the rabbinic stance of having fire prepared before Shabbat, opposition to the Karaite view that no fire may be present in one's homes on Shabbat. Similar arguments have been made for the origin to the custom of reading Pirkei Avot on Shabbat afternoons. We need to have a rabbinic tradition, rabbinic teachings that everyone is familiar with to counter the Karaite approach, which rejects rabbinic teachings. And he says the idea of reading about the laws of lighting Shabbos candles goes against the Karaite claim that you can't have Shabbos candles because the Karaites were literal interpreters of the Bible, of the Torah text, where it says you shall not kindle a flame in your homes on Shabbat, so they sat in the dark. We think that you just can't light the flame on Shabbos. If you light the flame before Shabbos, it's allowed. But Karaites did not have Shabbos candles. Traditional rabbinic Jews did have Shabbos candles. So we want to put the wisdom behind it into the hands of everybody. So every Friday night, all Jews reading from the Siddur would read about how we have Shabbos candles. Similarly, all Jews Shabbos afternoon would read about the rabbinic tradition, especially because how does that first chapter, Pirkei Avot, begin? Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. It starts with Moses and then traces the order of the chain of tradition through the rabbinic period. And that's something that Rabbi Soloveitchik focuses on, the importance of establishing an appreciation for that tradition. Source number 7, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, Halachic Moralities, Essays on Pirkei Avot. Ethical teaching consists of a living tradition of the transmission of values, not via theoretical learning, but through sympathetic understanding and human closeness. The disciple endeavors to act like his teacher. He wants to be him, to realize all values he discovered in the master. It is paradoxical yet true. Discipleship is equivalent to an act of repersonification, of reincarnation of the teacher's personality, like we talked about last week. What happens is nearly miraculous, a transmigration of soul qualities. The pupil shares in the richness emanated by the master. Hence, tradition serves not only as an information medium, but also as a living community that exemplifies the almost metaphysical relationship of master and disciple, the personal union of minds and hearts. Only within such a continuum is an ethical tradition possible. That is why this tractate is called Avot. This is what cements and elevates and animates the connection with the tradition of Judaism. This is how Tevye became right about saying everything is about tradition, because of the inculcation of this idea that through the popularization of Pirkei Avot. So that is the what is Pirkei Avot and why it is significant. Questions, comments, reactions before we explain how it appears on Shabbat afternoon and why it appears between Pesach and Shavuot. Okay, so let's go back to one of the sources that was quoted by Gutman, Rav Natronai Gon, source number 8. And thus said Rav Natronai Gon, it is the custom of the house of our teacher in Bavel that after Tfilat Mincha on Shabbat, one recites Avot and Kinyan Torah, which is the 6th chapter appended to Avot. So Pirkei Avot has 5 chapters in Mishnah, 1 chapter of teachings that was added to it. And that's why he says, we say Avot and Kinyan Torah, because it's 5 plus 1, that becomes the 6. So we have this already in the 9th century, that on Shabbat afternoon one is reciting Pirkei Avot. It doesn't tell us when, it doesn't tell us any time calendar. It may seem that this was done year round. At least that was the custom in Bavel at the time. So that was where we first have it. So why Shabbat afternoon? What's special about Shabbat afternoon? Why not Saturday morning? That's a bigger service than the afternoon. So there seems to have entered into the Jewish rituals of Shabbat afternoon that Shabbat afternoon is a more somber, serious time. Right? Maybe this relates to how we have the slower songs or the songs of Sudah Shlishit. So in this America, the Zohar mentions that Moses passed from this world at the hour of Shabbat Mincha prayers, which is a time of grace. So there's this idea that Moshe died at this time of day, and that creates a little bit more of a more somber period. And this is this becomes the focus of how Shabbat afternoon is where we acknowledge God's judgment. There's a small, short prayer recited Shabbat afternoon at Mincha, Tzidkas Chatzedek, your righteousness is righteous. And when Tosfot, so the rabbis of medieval Europe, were talking about this, they said, Masha Noag in source 10, Lomar Tziduk Hadim B'Shabbos B'Mincha. Why are we acknowledging God's judgment the same way? This is the type of a declaration we make at Jewish funerals. Why do we make that Jewish funeral declaration Shabbos afternoon? Perish Rav Sar Shalom Gaon Al Shanifta Moshe Rabbeinu B'Os Hashar, because that's when Moshe died. Lefichach Nimnu Milasok B'Torah. So we don't engage in more formal Torah study based on the expression in the Talmud, Chacham Shemes Kol Batei Midrasho Shvir B'Telem. We, when the rabbinic leader, when the Talmud Chacham, when the scholar dies, all of the study halls are quiet in his memory. And so therefore, Moshe died, so Shabbos afternoon is not a time for Torah study. It's a time for acknowledging God's judgments. So, and that's all because Moshe died on Shabbat. We have the Zohar comment on that. We have the Tosfot comment on that. But then Tosfot asks a question. Kasha, towards the end of the second line in Tosfot. Haksin ben mea v'esrim shana anochi hayom. Says that Moshe died fully on his birthday. Darshina hayom malu yemei shenosav. And this is when he died. It was his full 120 years. In b'Shabbos meis, if he died on Shabbos, in Cain, kasav hayom me erev Shabbos. If he's writing it on the day of his death, how can he be writing it on Shabbos? Right? If Moshe wrote the Torah and he's writing the end of the Torah on the day of his death, how could he write it then? Then if he's writing it the day before. Plus, we have another tradition that Moshe died on Friday. So did he die on Shabbos? Did he not die on Shabbos? Is Shabbos supposed to be a time for God acknowledging God's judgment or not? Right? How does that all fit in? So Tosfos says it's a time of more serious contemplation. It's not a time for Torah study. And then Tosfos says, but it's not so clear. And the Mordechai and Psachim, source number 11, also points it out that the day Moshe died, he wrote 13 Torah scrolls, one for each of the tribes, and one that was placed in the ark. If it was Shabbos, how do you write them? You can't write on Shabbos. All right, so Moshe died on Shabbos. Moshe didn't die on Shabbos, but there is this idea that he died on Shabbos, which impacts our religious behavior on Shabbos afternoon. We acknowledge God's judgment, and we don't have such significant Torah study. Moshe seems to be more significant than Yosef and David as to impacting our ritual behavior. David, the Gemara says, died on Shabbos. Yosef, not familiar with that source. Could be there, but I'm sure there's probably a source that says he died on a different day also, if we have that with Moshe as well. So when it comes to practical Jewish law, Shulchan Aruch points out, source number 12, we say tzidkascha, we acknowledge God's judgment. And if Shabbos falls at a time that if it was a weekday, we would not say tachnun, then we don't say tzidkascha. Right? If Shabbos is also Rosh Chodesh, you don't say tzidkascha. If there's a chasan in the room, you don't say tzidkascha. But it is a more somber period. For our purposes, the Rama, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, Ashkenazi practice, our custom is not to establish a study session between the afternoon and the evening service. We shouldn't have a Torah class, but we say Pirkei Avot in the summer and Shir Amalos in the winter, each place according to his custom. So here we have the first reference of Pirkei Avos. We said Shabbos Mincha, Shabbos afternoon Pirkei Avos, but now we have the first mention that it's taking place in the summer. Okay, Pirkei Avos is a nice time to study. Studying extra on Shabbos afternoon. Why specifically Shabbos afternoon? Well, it seems that the rabbis in the Talmud felt Shabbos afternoon is a good time for people to engage more deeply with religion. Right? And they say, source 13, the sages taught that Ezra the scribe instituted 10 ordinances that the community should read the Torah Shabbos afternoon. Right? We read the Torah on Shabbos afternoon, due to those who sit idly on street corners who do not attend the synagogue during the week. And not everyone fewer people go to the shul during the week than they do on Shabbos. So if there are more people in the shul on Shabbos, including Shabbos afternoon when you read the Torah, that's when you chap them. That's when you want to engage them in religious study. But wait a second, we just said you don't have deep religious study. So therefore, maybe this is the time to get them with more inspirational Jewish study, hence Pirkei Avot. So we have Pirkei Avot Shabbos afternoon. We have Shabbos afternoon as an opportune time where more people than usual during the week are coming to shul because the Torah is read. While they're there, we should teach them. What should we teach them? Well, we're a little bit less interested in teaching them significant, detailed Talmudic halachic topics. So let's teach them religious values. Let's teach them Pirkei Avot. And this is something that was mentioned, that the summertime in particular, remember, Ramah said Pirkei Avot in the summer. Why in the summer? So Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer in the Kaf HaChaim says, we say it in summertime. Why? Summertime, and you can clearly see how Judaism is Northern Hemisphere dominant. People, warmer weather, people enjoy themselves more, people may take more religious liberties. So you have to give them the religious inculcation and instruction to make sure they stay on the straight and narrow. And, he points out that Svardim, Omer Rosa B'Shachris, doesn't have to be Shabbos afternoon. He says Pirkei Avos is a summertime topic so that we can inspire the people to stay on the straight and narrow. Morning, evening, it doesn't really matter. But he points out somehow the custom developed. No, last line. Practice developed to primarily read Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Shavuot. There are those who will continue it straight through Rosh Hashanah, but the primary custom is between Pesach and Shavuot. Why specifically then? So we have already Rabbi David Abu Darham, 14th century Spain, who points out, source 16, the custom to read Pirkei Avot in the parak of acquiring Torah on Shabbos in the weeks between Pesach and Shavuot is because these days we count towards Matan Torah as like eagerly awaiting a beloved to arrive. Thus, most of this Masechta focused on the passion for learning Torah and doing mitzvot. Moreover, this is the time of the harvest, which is the time when people follow their desires and pleasures. Therefore, in order to calm our passion and strain our focus, we learn this Masechta of Avot, filled with Musar, to evoke greater levels of self-control and humility. And we ask Hashem to protect us from straying after our physical passion during this time. Right, channeling some of the sentiments that Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer mentioned, the idea that this is the time to be inspired for learning Torah and doing mitzvot in improving our behavior. Kind of, to me, resonates the idea of why we read Koheles on Sukkot. We're having too good a time, we have to be brought down to reality, brought back down to earth. Questions, comments, thoughts onto the rationale for the timing of Pirkei Avot on Shabbos afternoon, or specifically between Pesach and Shavuot?
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I'm not too tall. Is there such a thing as a tish below?
Is there such a thing as a tish below?
Yeah.
As opposed to?
Instead of a tish above, too tall for me.
Look, one of the teachings of Pirkei Avot is it doesn't matter how big or how small, as long as our hearts are directed towards heaven.
Right. Okay.
That I think is why so many people find Pirkei Avos relevant. Right, that's as we started. Here you have the Broadway producer and the White House scientist. All of them find everyone latches onto Pirkei Avos in their own specific way. And it's because there used to be the tomato sauce commercial about it's in there. I think it was Ragu. So it's in there. Whatever it might be you're looking for in terms of inspiration or Jewish wisdom, it can be found. And some people adopt more to certain parts of it than others. But it's in there. And but it's not an accident that Pirkei Avot turned into a Shabbos afternoon endeavor between Pesach and Shavuot. It was well known and well received as providing some of the fundamentals, the principles, the foundation of Judaism based on its presentation of values and its connecting us to previous generations, highlighting and strengthening the idea of tradition. Shabbat afternoon was classically a time for less rigorous, intensive Talmud or legal study. And if you're looking for a topic, this seems to fit. The summertime in general is a time for where we want to elevate the religious discourse and inspiration to people will stay on the straight and narrow. And then in particular before Shavuos, as we prepare to receive the Torah, this becomes very significant and very much in alignment with the last source, the classic Jewish expression, Derech Eretz Kadma La Torah. Derech Eretz, values and behavior and proper Jewish behavior, Kadma La Torah, precedes Torah, right? What is interesting is that expression is very often utilized, but it's not 100% an exact quote. If you look at source 17, Amar Rabbi Yishmael Bar Nachman, Esrim Rishisha Doros, there were 26 generations, Kadma Derech Eretz Es HaTorah. Now, the Torah, there were 26 generations of civility preceding the Torah because people lived their lives before there was Torah. As it says, Lishmor es derech eitz chaim, the world was created with a path to protect the tree of life. And then the derech is derech eretz, and achar kach eitz chaim. Only later on it says that there's a tree of life. Derech and then eitz chaim. So we always say derech eretz kadma l'Torah. The exact quote would be kadma derech eretz es haTorah. But let's face it, it's not as sharp. Derech eretz kadma l'Torah is better than kadma derech eretz es haTorah. So it's like the development of the Nike slogan. It wasn't like do it just. It became just do it because that fits better. So derech eretz kadma l'Torah was a snappier, catchier slogan, but the idea is found and the concept is anchored in this Vayikra Rabbah, in this midrashic source, and the validity of the statement is 100% there, even if the specific quote is somewhat taken from the verses and not an exact quote. And that also fits in, that if we're going to rededicate ourselves to the Torah on Shavuot, which is the anniversary of Sinai, it's not just something you can walk right into. It's something that should require preparation and evaluation and examination and of what are all the principles of Jewish behavior. And so whether it's rabbinic tradition, whether it's a connection to our Masorah and what came before us, or good values or good advice, that's meant to create the foundation that will make Shavuot more meaningful. And it is an annual, reinvigoration of our commitment to Jewish values, Jewish behavior, and Jewish learning. Any final questions, comments, or reactions? So it's not an accident. There was a method to Pirkei Avot turning into what has become, and these days, there are probably more commentaries and books written on Pirkei Avot or utilizing Pirkei Avot than any other Talmudic work. And it's because of what it represents, and the practice of when we read it also fits in a timely fashion for what Shabbat afternoon is about, for this time of year is all about, and specifically as we prepare for Shavuot. So if you haven't gotten on the Pirkei Avot bandwagon, it's not too late. There's still a couple of chapters, 2 more chapters left to go, and it's not so long, so you can really catch up if you want. And hopefully it will lead to a more meaningful Shavuot in just a couple of weeks.
Amen.